I woke up to the sound of water splashing where it absolutely shouldn't be. Not in my yard, not in my pipes, but somewhere out on the street, like the universe was trying to stage a slapstick comedy for the neighbors. I walked out, half asleep, coffee in hand, only to see my driveway flooded, the gravel washed into the gutter, and my water pump, yes, my literal water pump, ripped clean out of the ground like a weed. And there she was, Karen, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood dictator, standing over it like she had personally slain a dragon. She had that smug look on her face, the one she saved for moments she believed history would remember her for. Her hands were on her hips, and she was barking something at the two guys in polo shirts she'd dragged along as her crew. They weren't plumbers, that much was obvious. One of them was holding the pump upside down like it was an alien artifact, the other scrolling on his phone for YouTube tutorials. My first words were not heroic, just practical. Karen, that pump cost me 12 grand. Why are you touching it? She didn't flinch. This thing is unauthorized. The HOA never approved it, and it's disrupting the water flow for the neighborhood. I had no choice. No choice. She'd ripped out my pump at dawn because, no choice. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Not yet. I just pointed at her mansion across the street. You do realize that pump supplies your house too, right? She smirked. We have city water. We don't need your little toy. The irony, of course, is that her mansion had been built at the edge of the development, slightly uphill, far enough that the city mains didn't quite keep up. That's why my grandfather had installed that pump decades ago. It pulled from the underground reserve that every house on this side of the road tapped into. Without it, half the block's faucets would dribble like dying faucets in an abandoned motel. I didn't tell her that yet. I figured I'd let nature deliver the lesson. Sure enough, by mid-morning, I heard shouting from across the street. Karen's lawn sprinklers sputtered, her pool jets coughed, and her shower must have been down to a mist because she stomped out in a bathrobe, hair half-rinsed, screaming into her phone. This is unacceptable. Get over here right now, she yelled at whichever unlucky contractor had answered. I leaned on my porch railing, sipping my coffee like I was watching live theater. Her face turned redder by the minute, not just because of the lack of water, but because she slowly realized I wasn't going to run over there to fix it. Eventually, she spotted me and stormed across the street, bathrobe flapping like a cape. You have to fix this immediately, she demanded. I shrugged. Karen, you ripped it out. I didn't. You're responsible for community infrastructure, she snapped. If you refuse, the HOA will fine you. That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. Karen, the HOA doesn't own the pump. I do. And you destroyed it. Which means technically you owe me 12 grand. Plus installation. Plus damages. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She wasn't used to someone flipping the script on her. This isn't over, she hissed, then spun on her heel and stomped back to her house, dragging her useless polo shirt henchman with her. The thing about Karen is she believes escalation is power. If she can shout louder, write longer emails, or get more people on her side, she thinks she wins. By evening, I had a notice taped to my door. Failure to restore neighborhood water supply will result in HOA fines of $500 per day. Signed by her, of course. And below that, in her handwriting, consider this your final warning. What she didn't know, and what made me smile, was that I'd already filed a police report for vandalism. I'd also called my lawyer, who practically rubbed his hands with glee. Karen had crossed from petty HOA antics into real property destruction, and the law doesn't smile kindly on rich suburban tyrants with power tools. The next day, things got funnier. A line of landscapers pulled up to Karen's mansion, trucks full of men ready to mow, prune, and maintain her sprawling yard. Except when they tried to fire up their hoses, nothing came out. One by one, the trucks left, muttering about unpaid bills and wasted time. By noon, Karen's pristine estate looked less like a magazine cover and more like a thirsty jungle. She came storming out again, this time in full makeup, determined to show she still had control. She marched straight to my yard, waving papers. "These are cease and desist orders," she declared. "You can't withhold water from your neighbors." I smiled and took the papers, flipping through them. "Karen, these aren't even notarized. You printed them off your computer. And again, you destroyed the pump." "Not me." Her eyes narrowed. "Then I'll replace it myself. The HOA will order a new one." I let that hang for a moment, then asked, "And who's going to install it?" "Your YouTube guys." That one hit a nerve. She sputtered, stomped, and finally screeched, "You'll regret this," before stomping back to her drying-out kingdom. What she didn't know, and this is where my patience pays off, is that the underground reserve isn't exactly a free-for-all. My grandfather had the foresight to secure water rights when the development was first built. The pump wasn't just a convenience. It was legally the only method the neighborhood had permission to use. Without it, Karen's mansion wasn't just inconveniently dry. It was technically uninhabitable. That evening, I received a call from another neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who lived 2 doors down. She whispered into the phone like we were plotting a rebellion. "Did you know Karen doesn't have any water? She's been calling around, trying to shower at other people's houses. My husband said no, but she's furious." I chuckled. "Yeah, I might have heard." "She threatened to call the mayor," Mrs. Patel added, barely suppressing her laughter. The mayor. By day 3, Karen's pool was green, her toilets wouldn't flush, and she'd resorted to lugging bottled water from the gas station. The HOA sent out an emergency email blaming me, of course, but by then, the rest of the neighbors had connected the dots. They knew Karen had ripped out the pump, and they were starting to turn on her. That night, I sat on my porch again, sipping coffee, watching Karen pacing her driveway under the streetlight. She was shouting into her phone, furious, desperate, and increasingly cornered. I knew she was plotting something bigger, something reckless. And that was exactly what I was waiting for. Because the one thing Karen never learned is that power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from patience. And I had all the time in the world. By the 4th morning, I could hear the panic bleeding through Karen's voice before I even saw her. Her mansion loomed across the street like a stranded cruise ship, silent, lifeless, and bone-dry. She was on her front lawn, in a tennis skirt and visor that made her look like she was about to play doubles, screaming into her phone. The words carried across the road, sharp as glass. "I don't care what it costs, just get the water back on." She saw me lounging on my porch swing and shot me a glare so acidic it could have peeled the paint off my railing. I raised my coffee in salute. Her glare sharpened, but she snapped her head away before giving me the satisfaction of a meltdown in public. This was Karen at her most dangerous, the stage where desperation fused with entitlement. She could no longer bluff her way through with HOA letters and fines. She was running out of water, and she knew it. For someone like Karen, that wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. Her identity was built on control, appearances, the carefully curated image of a queen presiding over her kingdom. Without water, the kingdom rotted in front of everyone's eyes. I didn't have to wait long to see her next move. That afternoon, a white utility van rolled up in front of my driveway, bold blue letters reading "Rapid Flow Emergency Plumbing." 2 men in official-looking uniforms hopped out, toolboxes in hand. One approached me with a clipboard. "You the homeowner here?" I nodded slowly. "We've been contracted by the HOA to reinstall the community pump. Need you to sign off." I chuckled, shook my head, and stood up. "Sorry, gentlemen. The pump isn't HOA property. It's mine. You touch it without my permission, you're trespassing." They exchanged nervous looks. One of them lowered his voice. "Look, lady across the street said this was all authorized. Showed us some paperwork. Printed off her Dell inkjet?" I interrupted. "Let me guess. No county seals, no notarization, no signatures besides her own?" The plumber scratched his chin, clearly regretting showing up. "Something like that." I smiled. Then do yourselves a favor and leave before the cops arrive. I already filed a vandalism report. I'm sure you don't want your company dragged into that mess." The men didn't need further convincing. They packed their tools back in the van and drove off. Karen came barreling out of her mansion in time to see them retreat. She stomped her foot like a furious child and shrieked, "Cowards! He doesn't own the neighborhood." "I do." I leaned over the railing. "Karen, if you keep scaring away contractors, you'll have to shower at the gas station indefinitely. Hope you like fluorescent lighting." Her face went purple. She stormed back inside, and I swear I could hear the echo of a slammed door all the way from my porch. The next escalation came in the form of an emergency HOA meeting. Karen summoned everyone to the community clubhouse at dusk, insisting that critical infrastructure was at stake. Normally, these meetings were lightly attended, half a dozen retirees arguing about mailbox paint. This time, nearly every seat was filled. People wanted answers. Karen strutted to the front like a general preparing for war. She wore a silk blouse, gold jewelry, and that politician's smile she thought made her look trustworthy. Behind her, a poster board diagram displayed a crude drawing of the neighborhood water system, with my property circled in red marker. "This man," she began, pointing at me like I was the villain in a courtroom drama, "has intentionally withheld water from the community. He refuses to replace the pump, leaving our families without basic sanitation. The HOA cannot stand for this selfishness. We must act." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, but others looked skeptical. Mrs. Patel raised her hand. "Excuse me, but wasn't it you who removed the pump in the first place?" Karen's smile froze. "It was non-compliant infrastructure." Another neighbor, an older man named Mr. Lewis, chimed in. "Non-compliant, maybe. But it worked. Now nothing works." Karen's jaw clenched. She doubled down. "If we allow one man to control our water supply, what's next? He'll demand tribute? Rent? This is about protecting our community from tyranny." The irony nearly killed me. Karen, accusing me of tyranny, while she stood there with her nails digging into the HOA's throat. I raised my hand calmly. With all due respect, the pump was never community property. It was installed by my grandfather on private land. I have legal documentation of water rights, which my lawyer is currently holding. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to show the records. What Karen destroyed wasn't just equipment. It was a protected asset. Silence. Neighbors shifted in their seat. Karen tried to rally. "He's lying. He fabricated those documents." But her voice cracked, and everyone heard it. The meeting ended with no resolution, just a storm cloud hanging over the neighborhood. I walked out slowly, deliberately, enjoying the sight of Karen seething in her silk blouse as people began whispering to each other. I knew then that her power was slipping. She could only hold it by fear and bluster, and now both were evaporating faster than the water in her green pool. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. She pivoted. The following morning, I saw 3 black SUVs roll up to her mansion. Out stepped men in suits, lawyers. They carried briefcases like soldiers carried rifles. Within hours, I received a fat envelope stuffed into my mailbox. A lawsuit. Karen was suing me for negligent withholding of essential services and community endangerment. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the papers. My lawyer, on the other hand, laughed harder. "This is gold," he said over the phone. "She just handed us her head on a platter. Countersue for destruction of property, damages, harassment, and legal fees. I'll draft it tonight." That evening, while Karen's lawyers burned billable hours crafting their weak arguments, I sat with Mrs. Patel on her porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. She passed me a glass of iced tea. "She's unraveling," she whispered, almost gleeful. "She came to our door today demanding we let her use our bathroom. My husband told her to try Motel 6. I smirked. Desperate times. She threatened to cut off our mail service," Mrs. Patel said. "As if she controls the post office. By day 6, Karen's house was a spectacle. Delivery drivers refused to bring packages after hearing about her screaming matches. Her once manicured lawn browned in the heat. The HOA's email chain turned mutinous, members openly questioning her leadership. She responded with furious, all-caps messages about community unity and legal consequences, which only made people laugh harder. Then came the twist I'd been waiting for. A county inspector's sedan pulled up to her mansion. I recognized the man immediately. Mr. Alvarez, the county code enforcement officer. Clipboard in hand, he strode up to Karen's front door and began asking questions. I caught fragments carried by the breeze. Water rights, unauthorized removal, health code violations. Karen's shrieks echoed across the block. He can't do this. I am the HOA. Mr. Alvarez remained unbothered, jotting notes as she flailed in her doorway. Finally, he pointed toward my property, then toward the empty space where the pump had once stood. I knew exactly what was happening. The county was investigating her. Not me. Her. By the time the rain cleared, the neighborhood felt split down the middle. On one side, you had Karen's shrinking circle of loyalists, mostly the ones too afraid of crossing her, or too dependent on her faux authority to imagine life without her barking orders. On the other side, you had everyone else, watching her unravel with popcorn in hand. I was somewhere in between, not just watching, but carefully stacking dominoes, waiting for the moment when one flick would send them tumbling. The county inspector's visit had rattled her. You could see it in the way she patrolled her driveway the next morning, pacing with her phone glued to her ear. She wore oversized sunglasses like a celebrity trying to dodge paparazzi, except the only people watching were neighbors chuckling from behind curtains. I heard fragments of her conversations drifting across the street. They can't revoke. I'll sue the county. Emergency powers of the HOA. Emergency powers. I nearly spit out my coffee. Karen spoke of the HOA as if it were NATO, as if she could deploy tanks to secure a water pump. The truth was simpler. She was cornered and she needed an angle. That angle came at noon, when a flatbed truck rumbled up with a massive industrial pump strapped to the back. The thing looked like it had been stolen from an oil field. 2 workers in orange vests started unloading it, while Karen hovered nearby, shouting directions like a general leading troop. I wandered over casually. Planning to start your own fracking operation, Karen? She whipped off her sunglasses, eyes blazing. This is a temporary replacement. The HOA voted unanimously to authorize it. I scanned the workers. They looked exhausted already, probably having dealt with her screeching for hours. Did the HOA also authorize trespassing on private land? Because if you so much as put a shovel into my property, I'll have you arrested. Karen thrust a stack of papers at me. Legal orders. I skimmed the first page. It was a Google Doc with Community Emergency Act, typed in bold Comic Sans. I laughed so hard one of the workers actually snorted. Karen's face flushed crimson. Ma'am, one worker said nervously, we can't install this on property we don't have rights to. Liability, you know. Karen rounded on him. I am the HOA president. I authorize it. The man shrugged. Doesn't matter. If this guy owns the land, we're out. And just like that, they packed up. Karen screamed after them, fists waving, but the truck rolled off, leaving her stranded with a useless stack of printouts. She turned back to me, shaking with rage. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure you never get another drop of water either. I smiled thinly. Karen, that's the difference between us. You fight for control. I fight for patience. Guess who usually wins? Her teeth clenched so hard I thought they'd crack. She stormed off without another word. That night, the whispers started. Word spread that Karen's lawsuit was collapsing. The county inspector's report had circulated, and it was damning. She'd destroyed legally protected equipment, jeopardized water rights, and potentially endangered public health. Rumors flew that fines were coming, massive ones. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. The following morning, I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with flyers. Bright red letters screamed, "Warning! Your neighbor is hoarding water." Beneath it was a picture of me, snapped without permission, probably while I was mowing my lawn, captioned with absurd accusations: unauthorized well, illegal monopoly, endangering children. By lunchtime, every house on the block had one of those flyers taped to their doors. Kids on bikes waved them around like trading cards. Mrs. Patel called me, half laughing, half disgusted. She put one in our mailbox. My husband framed it on the fridge as art. I chuckled, but part of me simmered. Karen had crossed into smear campaigns now. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about her reputation warping into obsession. And obsessed people don't quit, they escalate until they self-destruct. That evening, I spotted something stranger. Karen's driveway lit up with floodlights. A dozen folding chairs were set out, and neighbors trickled in reluctantly, clutching paper cups of lemonade she'd clearly bribed them with. She was hosting an HOA emergency rally. I sat on my porch, amused, listening to her amplified voice through a cheap microphone. "He is stealing from us," she cried, jabbing a finger toward my house. "He hides behind so-called legal documents, but this is about fairness, about community survival. If we let one man control our lifeline, what happens when he decides to cut us off permanently? Will you let your children suffer?" A few scattered claps. Most people sat stone-faced, uncomfortable. Karen mistook silence for support. She ramped up. "We will not bow to tyranny. If the law won't help us, we'll help ourselves. Tomorrow morning, we take action." That line sent a shiver down my spine, not out of fear, but anticipation. Karen had just promised mob justice. She didn't realize that the moment she turned her neighbors into trespassers, she crossed from civil dispute into criminal conspiracy. I didn't sleep much that night, but not out of worry. I was too busy setting the stage. I made a few phone calls. To my lawyer, to the county inspector, and finally, to a contact at the local sheriff's department. All I had to say was, "The HOA is planning an unauthorized incursion at dawn." The officer sighed, muttered something about "these neighborhoods," and promised a patrol car. Sure enough, at sunrise, the army arrived. Karen led the charge in yoga pants and a sun visor, wielding a crowbar like Joan of Arc with a suburban twist. Behind her shuffled half a dozen reluctant neighbors, holding shovels, buckets, even a chainsaw. They marched across the street to my property line, chanting weakly, "Turn on the water! Turn on the water!" I stood on my porch, arms crossed. "Morning, folks. Planning a little light trespassing today." Karen raised her crowbar high. "This is your last chance. Reinstall the pump, or we'll do it ourselves." And that's when the sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Lights flashing, siren chirping once for emphasis. The crowd froze. Karen spun around, plastering on a fake smile. "Officer. Perfect timing. We were just—" The deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, we got a call about unauthorized assembly and attempted property damage. You mind explaining why you're holding a crowbar on someone else's lawn?" Karen sputtered. "This is an HOA matter." "Not how it works," the deputy replied flatly. He collected statements, took photos of the mob's tools, and finally turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm issuing you a formal warning. One more incident like this, and we'll pursue charges. Understand?" Karen's face collapsed into a mask of humiliated fury. She tried to argue, but the deputy silenced her with a look that said he'd dealt with 100 Karens before and wasn't in the mood for another. Slowly, the army dispersed, neighbors shuffling home, muttering apologies. Karen lingered, crowbar still in hand, until the deputy pointed at her driveway. "Go home." She obeyed. I thought that might be the end of it. That Karen, finally humiliated in front of the entire block, would retreat. But I underestimated her capacity for vengeance. That night, long after the lights went out, I caught a shadow moving across my yard. I stepped onto the porch quietly, watching as a figure crouched by the pump's foundation with a flashlight and a wrench. The morning after catching Karen skulking in my yard, I expected her to stay hidden. Anyone with a shred of self-preservation would have licked their wounds quietly, maybe lawyered up, maybe tried to negotiate. But Karen wasn't built for retreat. If anything, the humiliation seemed to fuel her. By 9 a.m., a moving truck rumbled up her driveway, not to move her out as I'd foolishly hoped, but to unload something worse. Pallets of 5-gallon water jugs, cases upon cases, stacked so high the deliverymen groaned under the weight. From my porch, I watched her orchestrate the spectacle. Put them by the garage. Line them neatly. People need to see, she barked, waving manicured hands like she was directing a symphony. Within an hour, the mountain of jugs towered like a pyramid. A bold banner stretched across the garage door: Community Water Distribution, HOA approved. It was so perfectly Karen, turning her disaster into theater, pretending to be the savior while hiding the fact that her own mansion was still bone-dry. Neighbors gathered cautiously, eyeing the jugs. Karen handed them out one by one, beaming as if she'd personally invented water. "See," she crowed. "We don't need his pump. The HOA provides." Mrs. Patel called me that afternoon, giggling like a schoolgirl. She tried to give us water. My husband asked if it came from her green pool. I laughed, but I wasn't blind to the danger. Karen wasn't just saving face. She was rewriting the narrative. She wanted people to forget she'd destroyed the pump, to recast herself as the heroic provider against my supposed tyranny. And if she could keep the illusion long enough, maybe, just maybe, she'd rally enough neighbors to shield her from the legal fallout. That night, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Delgado, a man who thrived on cases like this. He flipped through photos I'd taken. The flyers, the mob, the crowbar incident, Karen caught at the pump with a wrench. He grinned like a shark. "She's cooked," he said. "We file tomorrow. Property destruction, harassment, defamation, attempted trespass. The county will pile on health code violations. She'll either settle or drown in legal fees." "Good," I said. "But don't underestimate her. She'll try something insane." Delgado leaned back. "Insane people are easy to beat. They document their crimes for you. Just let her keep talking." I didn't have to wait long. The next day, Karen escalated again. This time it was media. A local news van pulled up to her mansion, satellite dish spinning, cameras rolling. Karen stood on her lawn in a pastel blazer, delivering a tearful monologue about the tyranny of one selfish neighbor hoarding water. She gestured dramatically toward my house, painting me as the villain starving families and children. I could have stayed quiet. Let her dig her grave on live TV. But Delgado urged me otherwise. "This is defamation on record. Get your side out now." So, I did what Karen never expected. I stepped onto my porch mid-broadcast. The reporter spotted me, jogged over, and asked for comment. I kept my voice calm, measured, almost bored. The pump she destroyed was legally owned by me, backed by water rights my family's held for decades. She didn't just break equipment, she endangered the very community she claims to protect. I've already filed charges. Karen, still mic'd, exploded. "He's lying. He fabricated everything. He's a water dictator." The reporter raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing gold. "Ma'am, did you authorize the removal of his pump?" Karen hesitated. That pause was her undoing. Everyone watching knew the truth. She stammered, tried to pivot, but the damage was done. By evening, the clip was viral, neighbors sharing it on Facebook, kids memeing it on TikTok. Water dictator trended for a day. Karen became a local punchline. That should have been the knockout blow. But humiliation has a way of sharpening dangerous edges. 2 nights later, I woke at 3 a.m. to a strange hum outside. I pulled back the curtain and froze. A portable generator sat in Karen's driveway, roaring like a beast. Hoses snaked from it across the street, straight into my yard. I threw on shoes, stormed outside, and followed the hoses. They were jammed crudely into the ground near the old pump site. She was trying to drill her own water access, illegally tapping into the underground reserve. "Karen!" I shouted over the generator. "Turn that off before you blow the whole system." She emerged from the shadows, hair wild, eyes fever-bright. "This water belongs to everyone. You can't keep it from us. Karen, you're about to rupture the main line. You'll flood half the block." She jabbed a finger at me. "Then it'll be your fault for hoarding it." Before I could argue, the hoses shuddered. A deep rumble echoed underground. Then, boom! A geyser of muddy water erupted, blasting 20 feet into the air, drenching her driveway, collapsing the soil around the pump site. The generator sputtered and died, sparks flying. Karen screamed as her perfect lawn turned into a swamp. Neighbors, woken by the chaos, poured out of their houses in pajamas. They gasped at the spectacle. Karen, standing ankle-deep in mud, soaked to the bone, screaming incoherently about tyranny. I stood calmly at the edge, arms crossed, while the county inspector's words replayed in my head. Unauthorized removal, health code violations. It wasn't just violation anymore. It was a catastrophe. The sheriff's department arrived within 20 minutes. They taped off the site, questioned witnesses, and finally approached Karen, who was still ranting. When she refused to calm down, they escorted her, screaming and dripping mud, into the back of a cruiser. The crowd of neighbors clapped softly, almost reverently, as the taillights disappeared. I thought, for one brief moment, that peace had finally returned. The geyser subsided, the street quieted, the neighbors shuffled home. I exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was over. But Karen wasn't finished. Not even close. The very next morning, a notice appeared on every door. Urgent HOA update, special assessment fee required. Karen had typed it from jail, apparently, and emailed it to her remaining allies. The demand? Each homeowner must pay $2,000 to repair communal water infrastructure. It was laughable, but also terrifying. She was trying to drag everyone into her chaos, to force them to pay for the very damage she caused. The backlash was immediate. Neighbors refused. They held their own impromptu meeting, without her. For the first time, people spoke openly about dissolving the HOA altogether. Mrs. Patel told me over tea, eyes wide with glee, "We're done with her. She's finished. We'll burn the whole HOA to the ground if we have to." And yet, in the middle of all this collapse, Karen found a new card to play. She made bail the next afternoon, and instead of hiding, she strutted back to her mansion as if nothing had happened. By sunset, movers were unloading yet another delivery. Not water this time, but stacks of bottled champagne, imported cheeses, luxury catering trays. She was throwing a party. A gala, even. Invitations hand-delivered to select households, promising an evening of unity and resilience. Her mansion, still stinking of mud and mildew, suddenly lit up with chandeliers and music blasting from rented speakers. Cars lined the street. By the time Karen's gala hit its peak, the entire neighborhood felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. I sat on my porch in the dark, a silent spectator to the circus across the street. Her mansion pulsed with music, strings of fairy lights glittered in the humid air, and the faint smell of catered hors d'oeuvres drifted downwind. Guests spilled onto her lawn in suits and dresses, plastic champagne flutes in hand, laughing nervously as though pretending everything was normal might make it true. From where I sat, it looked like denial dressed up as defiance. Karen, of course, was in the center of it all, strutting around in a sequin dress that sparkled like she thought she was still the queen of the block. She shouted over the music, telling anyone who would listen that she was winning against me, that the county had nothing, that her lawyers were seconds away from crushing my countersuit. Every laugh she forced from her guests sounded brittle. The irony was almost painful. Behind her mansion, the pool was still green. The lawn was patchy and water-starved, despite her decorative lighting trying to disguise it. The inside smelled faintly of mildew from the geyser she'd caused. And yet she kept spinning her fantasy, dragging everyone with her into the performance. Around 9 o'clock, something shifted. A convoy of cars pulled up, black sedans, not partygoers. Out stepped 3 county officials in suits, flanked by a pair of uniformed deputies. They moved with purpose, clipboards and flashlights in hand. Conversations on the lawn faltered as people noticed. The officials didn't even glance at the party. They walked straight toward Karen. I leaned forward in my chair, heart thrumming. The climax was here. Karen froze for a fraction of a second before slapping on a smile. She welcomed them like honored guests, thrusting a flute of champagne toward the lead inspector. He waved it away. "Ma'am, we're here to serve notice of violations and enforcement orders. You'll want to step inside." I could see it unraveling in her eyes. She tried to pull the officials aside, tried to argue in hushed tones, but the deputies didn't give her the chance. They moved into the house, guests parting awkwardly, whispers rippling. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Unauthorized excavation, endangerment, public health risk. The officials began posting bright orange notices on her doors and windows. Condemned, unsafe to occupy. Gasps swept through the crowd. Guests holding champagne suddenly looked like children caught with stolen candy. Some set their drinks down and slipped away. Karen snapped. She snatched one of the notices off the door, crumpling it in her fist, screaming, "You can't do this! I am the HOA. This is my home. You'll regret this." Her sequin dress glinted under the porch light as she ranted, veins standing out in her neck, mascara streaking down her cheeks. One of the deputies stepped forward calmly. "Ma'am, if you interfere again, we'll have to remove you." The crowd scattered then. Guests who'd moments earlier cheered her resilience now hustled to their cars, suddenly allergic to association. Within minutes, her grand gala evaporated into silence, broken only by the crickets and Karen's ragged sobs. I stayed on my porch, sipping whiskey, watching the show like the finale of a long-running series. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, she went nuclear. Flyers reappeared, thicker and more desperate, claiming the county was corrupt, that I had bribed officials, that this was a conspiracy to seize her property. She even staged a press conference on her front lawn, ranting into a cluster of microphones she must have rented. By then, only one cameraman showed up, a freelancer who seemed more interested in capturing a viral meltdown than legitimate news. Her tirade made the evening broadcast anyway. Local HOA president melts down as mansion condemned, scrolled across the Chiron. The clip showed her screeching, waving papers in the air, mascara running again. Online commenters had a field day. Some called her the Water Queen. Others just laughed at her threats. By day 3, her mansion sat dark. Utilities shut off, condemned stickers slapped on every entrance. Neighbors walked by, staring at the once pristine estate now sliding into decay. Her supposed empire had collapsed in full view of everyone she'd once tried to control. And then, the final twist. Late one night, long after most lights had gone out, I heard the familiar crunch of gravel in my driveway. I flicked on my porch light and froze. Karen stood there, disheveled, clutching a duffel bag. No sequin dress this time, just sweatpants and desperation. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse. "I need your help," she whispered. For a moment I almost laughed. After weeks of sabotage, lawsuits, smear campaigns, and outright vandalism, she was on my porch begging. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. She swallowed hard. "They took everything. The HOA turned on me. The county, they're fining me hundreds of thousands. I don't have water. I don't even have a place to shower. Please." I studied her. For the first time, she looked small. Not the tyrant barking orders, not the queen of the block, but just a broken person cornered by her own arrogance. A part of me almost pitied her. Almost. "Karen," I said finally, my voice calm but sharp. "You ripped out my pump. You smeared my name. You tried to turn the neighborhood into your army. And now you want me to fix it. Tears welled in her eyes. I made mistakes, but you don't understand. Control is all I had. Without it, I'm nothing. Her honesty startled me. Not because it excused her, but because it revealed the truth. Karen's entire reign had been a shield for her insecurity. Status, power, appearances, that was how she masked the emptiness underneath. I exhaled slowly, then stepped closer. You're right about one thing. Without control, you are nothing. And that's why you'll never stop until someone forces you to. So here's my help. Stay off my property and stay out of my life. Because the next time you show up here, you won't be walking away with a warning. Her face crumpled. She looked like she might collapse on the spot, but then her pride flared. She straightened, wiped her tears with the back of her hand and spat, "You'll regret this." She stormed off into the night, duffel bag swinging at her side, disappearing down the road. And that was the last time I saw her. The county seized her mansion within weeks. The HOA dissolved after a unanimous vote, neighbors laughing as they tore down the meeting signs. The pump was repaired under my supervision, water flowing again through the block as it always had. Life returned to normal, or at least, as normal as it could be after surviving Karen's war. Sometimes, when I sit on my porch with a coffee, I imagine where she went. Maybe she fled to another subdivision, already plotting her next reign. Maybe she rented an apartment somewhere, stripped of her throne, muttering about conspiracies to anyone who would listen. But in our neighborhood, she became a cautionary tale. Kids whispered about the water queen who lost her crown. Neighbors joked whenever the sprinklers worked, "Guess the dictator's pump is still running." And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just let the quiet return, knowing I'd outlasted her by doing what she never could, playing the long game. After Karen vanished into the night with her duffel bag, the neighborhood exhaled. It was as if the air itself had been holding its breath for weeks, waiting for the next shriek from across the street, the next HOA memo, the next outlandish stunt. Without her, the silence was almost unsettling. For the first few days, people walked slower, looked over their shoulders, expecting her to materialize again like a ghost. But as days bled into weeks, the silence held. Lawns grew green again. Packages arrived without incident. Kids rode their bikes without being scolded about helmet compliance or driveway chalk drawings. At first, I thought that was the end of it. Karen had lost her mansion, her presidency, her illusion of control. Surely that was enough. But when you've lived under someone like her long enough, you learn a critical truth. People like Karen don't just vanish. They lurk. They plot. They wait for a chance to crawl back into relevance. And when they do, it's usually louder and messier than before. The first sign was subtle. A postcard slipped into everyone's mailbox, postmarked 2 towns over. A new community alliance is forming, it declared in bold letters. Stronger, fairer, free of tyranny. Join us. No names attached, but I could see her fingerprints all over it, the pompous phrasing, the fixation on tyranny, the illusion of grassroots uprising. Neighbors rolled their eyes, some even laughed, but I didn't. 2 nights later, I was jolted awake by headlights sweeping across my bedroom window. I stepped onto the porch and saw a convoy of cars parked outside Karen's abandoned mansion. People were unloading folding tables, banners, boxes of papers. They moved quickly, nervously, like smugglers. At the center of it all, unmistakable even in the dim light, was Karen. Her sequin dresses were gone. Now she wore a plain hoodie and baseball cap, but her posture gave her away. The rigid spine, the pointed gestures, the imperious tilt of her chin. I felt both dread and amusement. She was trying to rise again, staging her comeback in the very ruins of her empire. The next morning, my suspicions were confirmed. Flyers plastered the lampposts, taped to mailboxes, even pinned to community bulletin board. The Alliance Against Water Tyranny, the header screamed. Beneath it was a manifesto railing against me, against the county, against corrupt systems that strip homeowners of their rights. It was absurd, almost comical, but she was relentless. Some neighbors grumbled, worried this meant trouble was starting again. Mrs. Patel called me, voice tight. She's back. What do we do? Same as before, I said calmly. Let her dig her own grave. All we have to do is watch. But Karen had learned from her mistakes. This time, she wasn't just yelling into the void. She was recruiting. She invited people from outside our neighborhood, disgruntled homeowners from other HOAs, conspiracy theorists with too much time on their hands, even a few self-proclaimed activists who just liked a stage. Within a week, the abandoned mansion buzzed with nightly meetings. Cars lined the street, chants echoed into the night. No more tyranny. Free our water. It was surreal, watching strangers march in front of my house with picket signs about issues they didn't understand. Karen stood at the helm, megaphone in hand, her voice cracking but determined. She had transformed her personal vendetta into a faux movement. At first, the county ignored it. But the noise grew. Local news crews showed up again, cameras panning across Karen's ragtag army. She played it perfectly this time. Calm, righteous, presenting herself not as a tyrant but as a martyr. I was punished for standing up to corruption, she declared to the cameras. They condemned my home because I refused to bow to one man's monopoly. I wanted to scream at the absurdity, but I knew better. Every word she spoke was a trap, baiting me to lash out, to look like the aggressor. So I didn't. I stayed silent. I watered my lawn, fixed my porch, waved to neighbors, and let the storm swirl around me. But storms have a way of breaking things. 2 weeks into Karen's alliance, the first act of vandalism struck. My mailbox was smashed to pieces, the shards scattered like bones. Spray paint scrawled across my driveway read, "Dictator." The next night, my truck's tires were slashed. Then came the rocks thrown through windows, the anonymous threats shoved under my door. It was no longer just Karen ranting, it was her followers acting on her delusions. I filed reports with the sheriff, but enforcement was slow. Karen knew exactly how to skirt the line, never personally throwing the rocks or slashing the tires, always standing just far enough away to deny responsibility. She was a conductor, orchestrating chaos while keeping her hands clean. The neighborhood, once united in their disdain for her, began to fracture. Some were too scared to speak against her. Others, tired of the drama, whispered that maybe I should just let her have her way, that maybe appeasing her would bring peace. Fear was her weapon now, and it was working. I refused to bend. One night, after another round of chants outside my house, I called Delgado. He listened quietly as I vented, then said, "She's escalating because she knows she's losing. People like her burn brightest right before they burn out. But we need evidence, something irrefutable." "Like catching her ordering an attack?" I asked. "Exactly. Get proof she's not just ranting but directing the chaos. Once we have that, it's over." So I waited. I installed cameras around my property, hidden but sharp. I let her rallies continue, her followers stomping through the neighborhood, her megaphone blaring. I pretended indifference, but every night I checked the footage, combing through hours of chaos for a slip-up. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Karen, standing on the ruined lawn of her mansion, raised her megaphone and shouted, "If the county won't act, we will. Hit him where it hurts. Smash his toys. Break his pump." There it was. Direct incitement. The very next morning, Delgado and I delivered the footage to the sheriff and the county attorney. They didn't even hesitate. Warrants were issued within days. When the deputies rolled up to Karen's Alliance headquarters, I watched from my porch as chaos erupted. Followers scattered like pigeons, some leaping into cars, others sprinting into the woods. Karen stood her ground, screaming about conspiracies, about tyranny, about her rights. The deputies cuffed her mid-rant, leading her away as cameras rolled once again. But this time, the story was different. The news anchors didn't paint her as a martyr. They called her what she had become, a ringleader of vandalism, a danger to the community. The footage of her ordering attacks played on loop, her voice shrill and damning. Her alliance evaporated overnight. The mansion was boarded up. The picket signs lay abandoned in the mud. The chants stopped. And just like that, the storm ended. Neighbors emerged cautiously, blinking like survivors after a hurricane. Mrs. Patel hugged me, her hands trembling. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded, but inside I knew better. With Karen, nothing was ever truly over. She'd find another platform, another crowd, another way to spin herself into relevance. People like her don't disappear. They just migrate. But here, in this neighborhood, her reign was finished. The sheriff's cruisers had barely faded down the street when the neighborhood slipped into a strange sort of quiet. It wasn't the ordinary, comfortable quiet of sprinklers hissing on a summer morning or kids squealing as they pedaled down the block. No, this was the hush of people holding their breath, waiting to see if the storm had really passed. Everyone wanted to believe it was over, that Karen had finally been dragged far enough away that she couldn't claw her way back. But when you've lived under her shadow long enough, suspicion lingers. The first week after her arrest felt surreal. The county boarded up her condemned mansion, slapping fresh orange notices across every entrance. The grand lawn where she once threw her shrill rallies sagged with mud, weeds crawling up the edges like they were reclaiming the earth. Neighbors walked past quickly, heads down, like the place was cursed. Some joked about it being haunted, but nobody really laughed. We'd all seen too much chaos spill from that property to treat it lightly. I tried to resume my routines. Coffee on the porch, mowing the lawn, repairing the mailbox that her followers had destroyed. But I couldn't shake the vigilance. I found myself checking the street more often, glancing at parked cars, listening for that shrill voice to erupt again. Karen was like a phantom limb. Gone, but impossible to ignore. Then came the letters. Not flyers, not HOA memos, but handwritten letters slipped under doors in the middle of the night. "The fight isn't over," they read. Karen was silenced, but she will return. They were signed with her initials, scrawled dramatically at the bottom. I wasn't sure whether they were written by Karen herself or one of her die-hard loyalists, but the effect was the same. Unease rippled through the block. Mrs. Patel called me in tears, whispering like she was in danger. "She's still out there. She won't let us go." I reassured her, though inside I felt the same chill. Letters meant Karen, or at least her influence, was still alive in the cracks of the community. She might have been physically removed, but her shadow lingered. My lawyer Delgado laughed when I showed him. "This is good," he said. "Every letter just adds to her pile of evidence. Harassment doesn't look good in court." But he didn't live across the street from the husk of her mansion. He didn't wake up at night thinking he heard footsteps on the gravel. The second week brought an even stranger twist. A moving truck appeared in front of her condemned house. At first, everyone panicked, thinking she was moving back in. But when the doors swung open, it wasn't furniture being unloaded. It was crews of county workers hauling in boxes, scaffolding, tools. They weren't moving her in, they were moving her out permanently. The mansion was slated for auction. The news spread fast. Some neighbors cheered openly. Others fretted about who would buy it, whether the ghost of Karen would taint the property forever. Me? I just sat on my porch, watching, wondering if this was the final chapter or just another act in her endless play. The night before the auction, it happened. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, sharp, violent, echoing from across the street. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and froze. Karen. She was inside her condemned mansion, prying boards off windows, dragging her duffel bag through the wreckage. Her hair was wild, her clothes torn, her face twisted with desperation. She was muttering to herself, loud enough for me to hear, "They can't take it, they can't take my house, it's mine, mine." For a long moment I just stood there, stunned. After everything, after arrests, lawsuits, humiliation, she had returned like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own empire. I dialed the sheriff, voice low but steady. She's back. She broke into the property. You'd better come quick. While I waited, I couldn't help but watch. She moved through the rooms like a deranged queen reclaiming her throne, brushing dust off countertops, straightening toppled chairs, whispering as if the house itself could still hear her. It wasn't rage now. It was something sadder, hollower. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was clinging. When the deputies arrived, their flashlights sliced through the broken windows. Karen shrieked, barricading herself in the living room, screaming about conspiracies, about how none of us understood, about how the house was part of her soul. It took 3 officers to pull her out, still kicking, still ranting, her voice cracking as she shouted, "I am the HOA. You can't erase me." Neighbors gathered silently in the street, watching her dragged away for the second time. Nobody clapped this time. Nobody jeered. There was just a heavy, collective silence, the kind that comes when you realize you're witnessing not just arrogance but a complete collapse of a person. The auction went forward the next day. Karen, of course, wasn't there. She was in custody again. The house sold to a quiet couple from out of town, people who had no idea of the history, who smiled politely as neighbors whispered warnings. Within weeks, they started renovations, scrubbing away the stains of Karen's reign. New paint, new windows, fresh sod on the lawn. Bit by bit, the scars disappeared. But scars in people linger longer. Even after the new family settled in, neighbors still lowered their voices when they walked by, still half-expected Karen to reappear on the lawn with a bullhorn. Kids told stories about the water witch who haunted the house. Mrs. Patel refused to walk past it alone at night. As for me, I felt conflicted. Victory didn't feel like victory. Yes, Karen was gone. Yes, the pump was restored, the HOA dissolved, the block peaceful again. But there was something unsettling about how it ended, not with a decisive triumph, but with Karen unraveling until she became a cautionary tale. One evening, weeks later, I found myself on the porch again, coffee in hand, watching the sunset. Mrs. Patel joined me, settling into the chair beside mine. She looked at the newly renovated mansion and shook her head. "Do you think she'll come back?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. People like her always come back. Maybe not here. Maybe not in this form. But somewhere, she'll find another stage. Mrs. Patel sipped her tea. "At least it won't be our stage." I nodded, but in my gut I knew the truth. Karen had become more than a person. She was a force of nature, the embodiment of entitlement and obsession. You can't destroy a storm. You can only survive it and hope it doesn't circle back. And yet, as the crickets hummed and the neighborhood settled into the calm we'd fought so hard for, I felt a strange peace. I had outlasted her. I had played the long game and won, not by shouting louder, not by matching her chaos, but by letting her destroy herself piece by piece. Sometimes, when the sprinklers hiss in the morning, I smile. Because they remind me of the pump she thought was her victory but became her downfall. Her empire crumbled not because I fought harder, but because she tore out the foundation herself. That's the thing about people like Karen. They believe control is strength. But in the end, it's their weakness. Strip it away and they collapse. So when people in town ask me about the saga, about the woman who ripped out a pump and lost everything overnight, I just shrug. We didn't beat her, I say. She beat herself.